Science does not have a moral dimension. It is like a knife. If you give it to a surgeon or to a murderer, each will use it differently. Wernher von Braun. Many know von Braun as the founder of modern rocket science. As the mastermind behind the Apollo 11 mission, the first expedition to the moon by the United States, he was a critical figure in the success of America during the space race. But what few people know is his past, the questionable activities that led up to his famous accomplishments. It is indisputable that Wernher von Braun was an eminent leader in contemporary space exploration and rocketry. However, von Braun's background hides a dark side, and his controversial legacy led towards the many capabilities humans have in the contemporary world. Von Braun's interest in rocketry began at the age of 13, when he was inspired by Rocket to Interplanetary Space, the first book to give clear calculations regarding rockets. In school, he excelled in math and physics. Later, in 1932, as a genius of rocket science, he graduated from the Berlin Technical University. Upon graduation from university, von Braun found that in the real world, science could not be practiced independently from issues of nationalism and international politics. At the end of World War I, Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which limited Germany's military. However, Germany decided to violate the treaty and started to rebuild its army anyways. In 1933, Hitler's Defense Corps army, called the Schutzstaffel, or the SS, became an auxiliary police unit, giving the military complete control over civilian life. Many Germans joined the Nazi Party as a result of this growing militarism. Thus, von Braun grew up in a world in which military interest dominated all other aspects of life. With World War II on the rise, von Braun would have some pivotal decisions to make concerning the path of his scientific career. The Nazis were interested in developing longer-range weapons that could turn the tide of the war. Meanwhile, they did not want any relevant technology to escape to the public, or other nations, so the practice of rocket science was forbidden to the public. In order to continue his pursuit of rocket science, von Braun made the life-changing decision to join the Nazi Party and to allow his work to be used for military purposes.
And Himmler told me, in essence, well, I hope you realize that this E4 has ceased to be a toy, for your engineers, that the whole German people is waiting for the new weapon of retaliation.
Von Braun's scientific work was no longer without moral consequences. He was no longer practicing pure science, but was practicing applied science in service of killing and death. He created the game-changing V2 rocket, eventually leading to the destruction and death of 2,724 innocent civilians in London, Paris, and Antwerp. Von Braun enabled more than 2,600 missiles to destroy property, terrorize opposing territories, and kill innocent people. Not only were the V2 rockets a dark side of von Braun's history, his obsessive pursuit of scientific goals also led to some questionable methods. One of these methods was his use of slave labor for rocket production. In 1940, von Braun joined the SS and began working in concentration camp Mittelbau-Dora in order to use prisoner slave labor to mass-produce his weapons. Every month, dozens of rockets were produced using slave labor. Under von Braun's control at Camp Dora, the Nazis exhausted, hanged, and executed 20,000 prisoners.
Did you ever see Wernher von Braun at the rocket camp?
Yes, we also. Anybody who was at the rocket camp saw von Braun to hang 5 people a day.
They were personally complicit in Nazi crimes.
Later, after he was no longer working for the Nazis, von Braun denied his control at Camp Dora. He claimed, "It was hellish. My spontaneous reaction was to talk to one of the SS guards. I realized that any attempt of reasoning on humane grounds was utterly futile." In spite of the undeniable horrors of von Braun's methods with the Nazis, it may be too simplistic to categorize such activities as mere manifestations of deep-seated political ideology. This is evident at the end of World War II, when the Germans were on the verge of defeat and were frantically trying to destroy rocket research to prevent other nations from acquiring the advanced technology. To save his work, von Braun disobeyed the Nazis and hid his precious research in the Harz Mountains. His loyalty was to science, and science alone. Seeing that he could no longer advance rocketry in Germany, he left the Nazis in spring of 1945 and led his team of rocket scientists to surrender to the Americans in hopes of continuing his research there. Wernher von Braun was an opportunist. Soon after World War II ended, relations between the United States and the Soviet Union began to deteriorate, creating the Cold War. Both nations looked up at the sky for their future, and it turned into a space race. The question was an issue of national pride. Who would control space? Hopes were quickly shattered for the US in 1957 when the Soviets launched the first satellite, Sputnik, into orbit. The Russians had beat the Americans at every turn. They had the first satellite, the first object on the moon, the first photographs of the moon, and the first man in space. The US was desperate for an advantage, which they found in von Braun and his team. Although the American government knew that von Braun was a former Nazi, the nation was growing desperate. It was decided that von Braun's missile work would be crucial to the lunar landing. However, they could not let the public know of von Braun's Nazi past. In fact, one of the reasons von Braun's Nazi past is so little known today is because of the circumstances of his recruitment by the US. To circumvent anti-Nazi laws, America gave 1,500 Nazi scientists false employment and political biographies in an operation called Operation Paperclip. Von Braun's Nazi slate was wiped clean. In order to advance his work, he handed over the original blueprints of future Nazi projects to the US space program. However, von Braun still faced one hurdle. In spite of the nationalistic symbolism, the space program was still controversial. President Eisenhower declared, "Anyone who would spend $40 billion in a race to the moon for prestige is nuts." Due to this opposition, von Braun could not fully reach his potential. However, this ended when President Kennedy was elected in 1960 and supported the lunar landing. Kennedy famously explains,
"We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win."
Kennedy also said, "Everything that we do ought to really be tied into getting onto the moon ahead of the Russians. Otherwise, we shouldn't be spending this kind of money because I'm not that interested in space." Kennedy stressed how important the space race was to the establishment of American global influence, and explained it would help to impress those choosing between freedom and communism. Von Braun and America had different goals, but the same means: rockets. Therefore, America supported him in designing the monumental rocket that would take America to outer space. Von Braun became the chief architect of the astonishingly successful Saturn V launch vehicle for the Apollo 11 mission. On July 20th, 1969, millions of people around the world watched the liftoff of the Apollo 11 mission. Wernher von Braun's dream had come true. He had led Neil Armstrong to the moon, led America into outer space, and led his field of rocket science to an unprecedented height. In addition to his legacy of taking the first humans to the moon, von Braun also envisioned an international space station, and the Saturn V rockets later launched it into space. He describes, "It will become a reality because of its tremendous potentialities as a deterrent of war," an ironic statement considering his military work for Nazi Germany. Von Braun was also a key figure in motivating American citizens to be inspired in science and space. He collaborated with Disney to create a movie series called Science Factual, inspiring 42 million Americans to support the space program. President Carter summed up von Braun's influence when he said, "To millions of Americans, Wernher von Braun's name is inextricably linked to our exploration of space and to the creative application of technology." Despite American enthusiasm for his work, the truth of von Braun's lasting legacy also lies in the creation of modern means for mass destruction. Scientists speculate that von Braun's V-2s were so advanced for their time that they accelerated the arrival of the intercontinental ballistic missiles widely used today by an entire decade. Millard, a first-hand witness of the V-2s in London, argues, "Rockets really haven't changed a great deal. We're still living in the age of the V-2. Von Braun's deep obsession with scientific advancement caused him to overlook moral standards. He was once a treacherous, literally slave-driving leader of concentration camp Mittelbau-Dora, as well as a visionary leader of the US space program. His legacy ranges from great leaps in understanding of our universe to the creation of horrific weapons that continue to plague our world. He was strictly a scientific pioneer, not caring where his rockets went down as long as they went up. For better or for worse, von Braun can be remembered as one of the most influential scientific leaders of all time.